Hi everyone, I'm Courtney. The comic that I was chosen for this class was the Buffy Season 8, which the title is The Long Way Home. It's the first episode, technically, of the Season 8 comics. The creative team, Whedon was on the TV show, and he still is a part of the comics, along with a gentleman named Meltzer. It's published by Dark Horses Comics. It's about roughly 136 to 140 pages because there's some extra on the Kindle version. Um, the biggest interesting part about it is everyone thought Buffy was over and the TV show on season 7. And well, it continues on in the comics, bringing all the characters back fighting and adding new characters. They bring a lot of old characters back but this is just the beginning, season 8 for the comics, because they're still going and it's season 11 right now. It doesn't really have that normal pace of 1-4 1-2 1-4, and it doesn't have any acts at all. They call it parts, and they've got 5 parts in the story. Roughly, they're pretty close in amount of scenes or pages for the part 1 is 24, part 2 is 24, part 3 is 22, part 4 is 22, and part 5 is 21. So they're roughly pretty close. So there's not that pacing that we've been studying isn't really into this comic. Um, I think more likely it's like each part is its own little story, like an episode. They're kind of writing it almost like people are viewing it like a TV show. But they interlace it together and form one giant story to give you a big cliffhanger. It's some drawing that they're calling Twilight. So that's apparently their big bad for their season 8. And this first one only brought you like maybe a foot into it. They don't even describe much. They just say Twilight is coming at the end. So it's really not described much. And I found it extremely confusing. And it might be because I watched the show so much, so I know a lot about Buffy, and it's a completely different way to express the show. So the writing is different and it's harder to follow. So that could be one reason. But it does have a great clear beginning, and it pretty much, not right away, but takes up very close right after the end of the season show of 7. And it starts right with all the Slayers back and they're fighting some big monster. And but the it doesn't have anywhere near much of a middle nor at all an ending, because they are having it to be 8 booklets of their own. So it's going to be continuation on every booklet. So they don't just end it. Um, and they've just ended it with a little bit of a cliffhanger, like I said when I said that the Twilight is coming. So it's the introduction to the big bad, basically. And part 5, which I would say part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, while they're own a little bit own story, they do kind of flow together and they do follow each other in points. But part 5 is almost of like a preface of part 1, because it really doesn't follow anything. It makes zero sense. It's even more confusing than the actual comic. Um, I think in the beginning of the comic, it starts off with Buffy explaining that there's 2 other people pretending to be Buffy. One of them's partying in Paris, and the other one is off fighting some big bad. And part 5 is one of the Buffys that's pretending to be a Buffy, one of them who explaining what they're doing, and it really doesn't explain, and it's pretty confusing. So, first of all, I'm giving my opinion. Unless you really like comics and or really like Buffy, it doesn't follow, and it's very confusing. Um, but it takes a lot of the TV show, and it incorporates it into making sure like Willow doesn't go dark again like she did in the TV show by using too much of her powers. And they do a lot of training of the Slayers now that there's hundreds and hundreds more of them, which was shown at the end of season 7. So they do incorporate new parts. You now see Xander with an eye patch because he had his eyes gouged out in season 7. Um, and the big show change from the comic is that they introduced Dawn, which is Buffy's sister, as a giant. They don't explain why, they don't explain really how, and they don't figure out a way to change her back. So that's the biggest change that the characters really go through because, like I said, it's 8 episodes or 8 comics. So they don't really have drastic changings for the characters because it's going to be such a continuation. It's more like a small change. Um, let's see. There is one thing about this that I thought they did well on, and probably made it maybe less confusing, is they had a good flow of the pictures and the transitions. It was really easy to understand where we were at in a scene, if we were outside, where we were fighting, what was going on, more so in picture form than it was in any of the dialogue. Um, a lot of the pictures didn't a lot of them didn't even have dialogue on it because a lot of Buffy is action, and you see a lot of these Slayers and Buffy constantly attacking either each other for training, or they are doing attacking of the monsters, or so you get a lot of action more versus the dialogue. So that's the one thing that I think they have really well going for them. And this can't even be construed as a mini comic because, like I've said many times, it's huge. So they're going to expand it out. They're going to draw out things. So things aren't going to be always answered, and it's going to be confusing, and you're not going to probably understand maybe something that was said in book 1, maybe not brought up again till book 3, book 4. So these are not mini stories. These are not mini comics. And even though I said that each part had like a little bit of their own story arc to it, it doesn't start or finish or end. You couldn't read a part and understand what was going on because you can't even read book 1 and understand what's going on. Um, and I said the pictures are the saving grace of the piece because you can understand what is going on. I've read comics in the past, mostly Archie's, and granted, they are very straightforward and you can understand and follow it very clearly. The reading level is lower. I could understand those stories because not just the pictures, but the dialogue made sense with what was going on. Sometimes I don't think the dialogue makes sense with what's going on in the comic.